Hey everybody, I'm Spencer. Now I don't have a hilarious or clever introduction to this video because I used all my creative juices for the day on the introduction for my smartphone ink review, which you can find a link to in the description of this video. I highly recommend you go watch it because, well, it's funny and clever. This short review is for the first expansion to Smartphone Ink, Status Update 1.1. Let's go ahead and get to it. The Status Update 1.1 expansion adds just a few things. The first most major one, is the board. So this is the original board, and this is the new board. This is to make it easier to play 2 to 3 players. It's smaller, less areas to go to, it's tighter, and for a 3-player game, this is all you play with. So let me go ahead and get this out of the way to show you. This is 2/3 of the original board. So yeah, you've got fewer countries to go to, and then there are fewer of these improvements that you have to choose from. Now, the 2 to 3 player board is considered one of the modules. Now, there are 4 modules in the expansion. The other ones don't really change the gameplay other than adding things. Nothing's changed from the original rules. You're just adding things on top of it. The first thing is the Directives Module. Now, the Directives Module includes all these different directives. Now, what these are, they're essentially goals that you want to reach toward, and you'll put a certain amount out there. And but there are things like occupy the last office space in a region, place 3 office spaces in 1 round. So you get the idea. There are all kinds of things. Have 2 different patents, and you can see there are so many. And what will happen is, if you're the first to complete the goal, you get to take it, and they're worth a certain amount of points depending on how difficult they are. Actually, it looks like they're all 12 points. And I didn't clarify, each of these modules can be added even if you're not playing with the 2 to 3 player board. So if you're playing with the main board, if you're playing a 4 to 5 player game, you can add these to that. It's not required to play with this board. Another module is new technologies. So I've gone ahead and placed these in here. There's not a new one for the whatever that is, the SIM card or whatever. But the other technologies, there are new tiles for that. It's going to increase the difficulty a little bit, but they help you in the rule book to help you kind of balance that out, show you which ones you should use, which ones you don't. One of them in particular, though, I want to draw your attention to is the Wi-Fi. Now, this talks about using your CEO. So Wi-Fi on one side, and the other side it's game, so on the game controller. So it just depends on which one you end up using. But it refers to your CEO, and you'll place your CEO in a region, just depending on like when you initially start, it'll go into your starting region. But there are ways to move it around the board. But this one says, at the end of your turn this phase, you may sell 1 good in 1 region with your office and CEO. So that's like an extra way to sell a good. This other one says, you may ignore the requirements and sell to buyers in a region with... You may ignore... On the other side, it says, you may ignore the requirements and sell to any buyers in a region with your building and a CEO. So that one's really powerful. But other than that, that's all the CEO does. He doesn't like come around and tell people what to do. And everybody, of course, gets their own CEO, and you've got the little colored rings to say whose is whose. But that's the new technologies module. And finally, there is a hardcore module, and there are rules in here on how to play more difficult, a more difficult way. So if you want to increase the difficulty, and that's something that interests you, there's that. Finally, one of the other technologies mentions these mini improvements. So it's another way, instead of getting these, you'll get to have one that just improves 1 square at a time. So I can imagine how those would be helpful in certain situations. Other than that, that's what's included in the expansion. Now let's talk about the new stuff. So we've got the Directives module, those goals. I like those. That they can change your strategy of what you're going for. They're going to give you other things to think about and maybe push you along in one direction as you go for those goals than you would normally. And then the fact that there's a race to get to those, I enjoy that and think it's a nice addition. The 2 to 3 player board is great. Of course, it's smaller and it condenses things, and I like that. And you use fewer of those retailer tiles, which I don't like, but you still use them in a 2-player game. And so I thought for this map, it was supposed to make things, not like that. And for a 3-player game, to be fair, you don't use those, and that's great. But again, if you're going for a 2-player game and don't like those restrictions, as I've mentioned before in my previous review, This doesn't fix that as much. Another change that I appreciate is the new buyers with mixed demands. Instead of wanting either a price or a technology, you have some that you can do either or on those particular buyers, and that gives you some flexibility when it comes to strategizing. Of course, there's so much variety added with those new technologies. There's so many of those, front and back, that adds variety. They do a great job that you can mix and match the old ones with the new ones. They come with recommended sets of, if you want this style of gameplay, use these. If you want this style of gameplay, mix and match these. There's some great direction there, so you're not just throwing stuff out there randomly and seeing what happens. Now, the one thing that I was really kind of let down about was the CEO, the inclusion of the CEO figures. I thought that those were going to play a larger part, but those only come into play if you're using a particular technology. And when you do that, you put your CEO down on the board, and it just helps you do better by a little bit. They don't play a larger part in the game, especially if you're not using those particular technologies. You don't use them at all. So I had wished that they'd play a larger part than they actually do. Finally, there are hardcore mode rules. So if you want an even more of a challenge with Smartphone Inc., then this expansion will add that for you. So that brings me to the point. Do you need the expansion? Well, if you're watching this before you've played Smartphone Inc., I definitely recommend you play it before you even consider buying the expansion. You want to make sure it's a style of game that you like. And not just that, but think of the people that you normally play games with. Is it something that they're going to like? So maybe try it out with them before you decide about the expansion. So if you do like the expansion and see yourself or your game group wanting to really dig in, I recommend the expansion if you can get it for a reasonable price. The new board is definitely helpful, but I feel like that's where most of the money that you're spending on the expansion goes towards. And it's definitely the largest expense, I imagine, in producing the game. So that's really what you're going to be paying for most. So if you don't play with a 2 to 3 player game, then you have to ask yourself, are these little things that were added, are they worth this money that I'm willing to be spending on it? And that's a decision only you can make. It's just a few minute things that are added. If you like the game so much, then sure, get the expansion. But if you're on the fence, maybe those little additions aren't enough for you to buy the expansion. Thank you so much for watching this video. For more reviews, both by me and sometimes my daughters, please subscribe to the Lighten Up initiative. You'll also find comedy sketches, tutorials, and full game playthroughs. Now, until next time, don't take the board game hobby too seriously. There's no need to lose your mind when someone doesn't agree with you about your favorite game, or when your Kickstarter doesn't arrive right on time. Just take my advice and lighten up.